Hello, everybody. I am here solo. My guest for today is having a little bit of technical difficulties, as you know, happen from time to time. So I thought what I would do is hop in here, and if Evan is able to join, then he will join when he gets. I will pop him up on the screen when he gets on. Otherwise, I would just chat with you solo for a little bit, share with you about some things that have been going on. I'm gonna see if I can answer some questions here. I know some people have been saying they would like the Q&A. I'm not sure here. The best way to do that because I think some of the questions don't feed over to Facebook. So to be completely honest, I've never done it that way. Hey, I've got somebody saying hi, hello via YouTube. Thank you for hopping on. I am going to just kind of freelance, free for all right now. Right, freestyle. That's the word that I was looking for. Freestyle right now because I don't have the guests. So talk a little bit about, as you know, last week I had kind of a really super busy but wonderful week. I had two of my kids had proms. We had two concerts. We had two trips, a bunch of different things going on. And then I went to an event in Atlanta, and I have a child walking in. I'm live. Thank you for that, bringing me a snack. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. He didn't know I was live right now. Anyway, the goal that I had for last week, I had this event coming up that I had registered for last year, and I still wanted to be sure that I could be very much present for my family. And balancing those things sometimes can be really tricky, right? When do you make time for the events that you want to do with your family, and when do you make time for the events that you're doing in your personal professional journey? Evan's on right now, so I'm going to bring him up, but I will finish this story. Evan, hello, Evan. I'm in the middle of a story that I was babbling incoherently about. I don't know if you were watching as I was quickly trying to do a unprepared solo, but thank you for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sorry for the technical difficulties. My computer decided to act up this morning, which is the usual fit it throws anytime I have to do anything important.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because normally, like, I've done solo lives, right? But for some reason, because like we were gonna go, and I was like, oh, I'll just pop on here and I'll start talking. Completely, I can't even blame it on lack of caffeine because I just finished a cup of coffee, but my brain just started spazzing out. And but I was talking a little bit about, and we could kind of segue that in, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Last week I had the crazy week with all these different things going on with my family, and I had that event that I had already scheduled that I was going to, and was trying to decide, like, how do I do this? And so packed it all in, got on a plane, got there Saturday night, and was able to make it, and was well worth it, even just to be there for the day, hang out with awesome folks like yourself, which we'll talk a little bit about. And it's, when I look back at the week, right, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I did it. I was just kind of in that operation mode. I know that you can relate to that from conversations we've had. You look ahead and you're like, these are the things that have to happen. And in hindsight, you know, how I had to kind of jiggle everything around. And it can be tricky, but so important, because I was present in the places that I wanted to be present as much as I possibly could. And life is so short, and that's what we want to do. And I think, you know, one of the things that you do in regards to life being short from a professional perspective, and we could talk about personal as well, is storytelling, right? And whether it's a product or it's a person or it's entertainment purposes, whatever it is that you're putting together in video content, it's about telling a story. Stories are the backbone of life, right? All of our experiences are stories, and what's going to happen to us in the future is the stories we haven't yet read. So I think that that's kind of a cool thing that we can dig into a little bit. But before we go off on that tangent, and as I pull myself back from whatever mild confusion was going on in my brain for a minute there, why don't we take a moment to have you tell everybody who you are and what you do. Again, thank you for joining, and thank you to everybody who's joining us live or watching the recorded version.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody out there. My name is Evan J. Cholfin, and I am a film, television, and branded entertainment producer. So what I do is produce film, television, and what is called brand entertainment. So that is any kind of content that moves the brand for moves the needle for brands with a focus on storytelling.
Yeah, and I feel like as succinct and clear as that is, I feel like it doesn't even fully kind of grasp the scope of it, because I think when people think of storytelling, they probably have some preconceived notions from stuff that they've had. But I think, and I'll share, part of our personal, journey in terms of your business, and that might kind of help to let people peel back that layer, is that there's a couple parts to storytelling. Well, there's more than a couple parts to storytelling, but there's obviously going to be the what gets said, there's going to be the what gets shown, there's going to be what gets felt. In order to really capture those things, it's not just about like, here is the product, the person, or the service, and here's what they do, but here is who that person is at the core. And I know that in having the conversation with you, there were iterations on what that project was going to look like in terms of working on my reel, because yes, I very much wanted people to be able to understand from a business or personal perspective what I provide as services. Here's the skill set that I have. Here's how I've been successful in that way. But for me, there was like dual branding going on, because it was also very much about my storytelling, my poetry, my desire to kind of spread kindness, not kind of, but very much to spread kindness and love in the world. And that those two speaking things kind of merge together, right? I could be on a stage talking about change planning, but I also am going to be building into that how we can navigate change and do it in a way that's kind. And so when we talked, it was like we did an interview and you were asking questions, and the other person on your team that was working with us, Daniel, things about my past, things that matter to me, things that make me laugh, right? To really elicit responses from me that were beyond what you might normally put in, like, let's say, a media bio or a quick couple liner where you introduce yourself, so that you would be able to show people that side of me. And we ended up incorporating childhood pictures and things like that to get that full depth view. So it's very much about getting to know somebody beyond just what is it that they do and why do they do it, but who they are as a person at the core. Is that something you feel like you just in general have always kind of been interested in, understanding the motivators behind people's actions? Like, were you the kid that when you talked to somebody kind of asked a lot of questions?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been interested in what makes people tick, uh, and also really have been interested in helping people. I see that whenever someone is in trouble or needs help, I've always kind of been the kid growing up and even into my teen years and adulthood, to be there and to be supportive and to help as much as I can. Everywhere from putting on benefit events in high school. I put on a couple benefits, rock concerts, for one of them for the Bonnie Raitt's Rhythm and Blues Foundation. We raised money to help artists who basically got screwed over by the record labels at the time and didn't really see a dime from some famous music actually that we all love and hear. And then the second year, we put on a benefit that was for a group called Rawa, which is a revolutionary group in Afghanistan of women who were, this was before 9/11, and we were documenting, they were documenting what was going on against women by what became known to us as the Taliban, before we even knew what the Taliban were. And so I continued to do that in college. And the senior year of college, I was at UCLA for undergrad. I put on a benefit, and the focus was on over 400 women at the time, unfortunately, had been brutally raped and murdered, and their bodies turned up in the desert outside Juarez, Mexico, which is right across the border from El Paso. And really, not only did people not know what was going on with them, but people didn't even know that it was happening. And so in LA, to really bring a spotlight to the issue, we thought, well, why don't we try to get someone from the entertainment community involved? I didn't really know anyone. So we went through friends of friends of friends and tried to get somebody to help, and we ended up getting the support of Edward James Olmos, who I'm a huge fan of. Everywhere from you name it, he's been Blade Runner, Zoot Suit, so many other movies and TV shows since, um, and he was such a great supporter. The host of the program had starred opposite him in many movies, a screenwriter and actress named Evelina Fernandez, and she saw the work I'd done producing this event, which we got works of art from all over the world from artists, 400 pieces of art, and each representing each of the women who had died, and we auctioned those off and then raised money for the only rape crisis center in Juarez at the time, called Casa Amiga. And she saw the work I'd done producing that event and asked if I knew I was interested in film, and asked if I wanted to help produce her next movie. So I was 22 years old, and that was my first opportunity actually to get to produce a film.
Wow. So beautiful. I never knew that. I mean, beautiful, your mission. The story obviously is horrible and tragic. And, it's interesting, though, that your desire to be of service is what led into this opportunity, right? And I think there's a lot to be unwrapped in that. And certainly we don't want to go into acts of service with the expectation that there's going to be reciprocation or it's somehow going to pay off. But it's interesting how many times when we operate from a place of service, we do find ourselves placed in circumstances and provided with opportunities because of leaning forward into not looking for them, but looking for what you could do for other people. One of the things that I'll talk about sometimes from the stage, or even when I'm doing like consultant work, is that notion that like sometimes the biggest win that we will have in a situation is the result that's going to be for somebody else. Because if we think about us as being all connected, when somebody else is successful or is able to overcome a difficult circumstance because of something that we do, that is a win for us because we're all here and able to collaborate and help each other. And so that did provide that opportunity for you kind of doing that specific thing. And I also think it connects with, you were saying like you like to know why people tick. And like I think about a lot of times for me, I really try. I'm not always successful. I don't know anybody who's ever 100% successful, but there are certainly people that are better at it than others, is trying to consider other people's perspectives and their frame of reference and why they think something that's different from my perspective, or why something is happening. And so I think that does contribute also to empathy, because when somebody does something that is perplexing to you, because from your perspective, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense with the experiences you've had, the information you've been given. And so you look at the situation, you're like, I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense. But when we think about, well, that person may have a different frame of reference. And I use a lot of times the example of somebody cutting you off in traffic. And it can be that person's cutting you off in traffic because they think they own the highway, right? Like a lot of, that person thinks they're better than everybody. Or they could be cutting you off in traffic because they just got really bad news and they're on the way to the hospital, or because they've just had something really bad happen and they're distracted, right? There's all those other reasons that somebody could cut you off in traffic. And so suddenly, from in this place of frustration that this person is doing something that's, thoughtless and disregarding you, it's they're operating under the circumstance that's impacted them. And that has to do with, like you said, understanding what makes people tick, what is going on inside people, why are people saying or doing things the way that they are. And that empathy then drives us to try to alleviate situations rather than operating from a place of frustration. Again, because that sounds really pretty. And it's like, oh, Deb, that's awesome. You must be really nice to everybody. I fail. We all, right? I fail. There's times when I try to do that, and then I'm like, oh, I was judgmental, or I didn't really take the time to consider other perspectives. But I think like that's where that desire to help comes from, when you know that we all have these different things that have influenced us that are difficult to overcome. And a lot of them are unknown, whether it's something that is relatively minuscule from a global perspective and is more just to us, or something big like you're talking about that people didn't know was going on. right? And here you were kind of shedding light on that and opening up the doors to it. And it's difficult topics. People don't want to talk about stuff like that in general because it's hard. So that's really that's really interesting to hear how that kind of contributed to it. And you mentioned you were always the kid kind of wondering how people tick. And I think in my mind from our conversations, I also picture you in some similar ways. Like I was always the kid who had like a camera in her hand. And that was twofold. Part of it was the artistic component of it, right? Like I like the way that that water is hitting that shadow. I'm going to like try to capture that. But part of it's also the like embracing the moment and wanting to be able to potentially share that with somebody else or to be able to look back on it myself. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that because I see you nodding. Were you as a child kind of involved in photography or artistic endeavors? Maybe you were directing your friends on the parking lot into skits. I don't know.
Yeah, ever since I was 5 years old, I got a hold of my dad's video camera and made movies with my Legos, made stop motion movies and my train set, and just continued to make movies with my friends all through elementary school and high school. And just continued to hone my craft. Photography was a big thing for me. Also, a lot of illustration drawing and some charcoal painting. Really trying, I like the way you put it of trying to capture the moment. And that's something that it's really kind of a special thing when you can take a scene or a moment in time, an emotion, a feeling, and capture that and encapsulate it and then be able to share that with other people. I think it's a really special thing.
Yeah. And, obviously in video, you get motion and you get sound, which is a whole other element in and of itself. And I think also even in pictures, like, because I like photography and I like writing, and I think of pictures as being like visual poetry, right? Like if you capture things a certain way, you can feel an emotion. Sometimes you're not even sure what it is. It's the angle. Like you could turn your camera just slightly, and because now the picture is not completely in alignment, it evokes a different feeling than it would have been if you turned it this way, or if you stood further back, or the focal point was something different. It evokes that emotion. So, like you were just saying, that I had noted, capturing the moment, capturing the emotion, kind of inviting people into your experience, whether they were with you or not, or even when they're with you, right? Like I've been on trips with people, they're standing right next to me and I take a picture and they'll look at the picture and be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. They were present. They were watching that same scene, but the picture is bringing a different emotion to it than when they were seeing that moment themselves, right? And that's the power we have with art, and why I hold it in such a high esteem and think that it's of so much value, because it does help us to feel things and express things in ways that we sometimes are unable to in just common conversation. Not all the times. I mean, sometimes I certainly have had amazing conversations that have also had their own artistic nature to them, such as this, right? When you're bonding with people and you're sharing with people, that is art as well. So what are some of the, first off, I would love to see your Lego stop motion. So you said that, and I'm just like, what I wouldn't do to get access to the Google Drive or wherever it is that, maybe it's not Google Drive, maybe it's a portable hard drive with all of Evan's Lego stop motion video.
Yeah, I still have them. I'll have to show them to you sometime. They're pretty amusing.
Yeah, I mean, I would put them out there. I feel like people are fascinated by the evolution of our professional journey, and like what we do as kids very much impacts whether you picked a path that is related to that or not, right? Like you could be pretending to be a doctor when you were 5, and yet you can see the connections between that and being a music conductor, right? Like there's the ways that our behaviors and our way of thinking kind of plays out over the course of our lives. Is there a particular theme, let's say theme, because I know video in general, and you've done animated, you've done stop motion, you've done what would you call, I forget, there's a name for it when it's just people, real people, but there's like an art name.
Yeah, biopics or
something like that, right?
Yeah,
or just realistic.
But
when it's like actual actors and actresses, like what? So you've done all of those, so you could maybe speak to that from a motif perspective, but also just like thematically, what is a topic or a theme that you really like to focus on when you're doing artwork that really fills you?
Yeah, well, for me, in terms of film and television, but I think maybe it would expand to art in general. Now that I think about it more explicitly, I look for really two things: truth and spectacle. So the spectacle is what gets people to watch it, whatever that is, and then the truth is tapping into something about who we are as people and exploring that through the characters and the choices that they make, and what they have to face, the obstacles they have to
Mm.
overcome.
So the personal journey, like what is it that people, so it's not even like they could be going through happiness, sadness, anger, but it's like how do they maneuver through that emotion in that situation they're encountering. Yeah, fascinating. Well, that ties in with, of course, like you said, wanting to understand the motivations behind people's actions. Um, yeah, I think it's interesting because in social media, right, they talk about that first, if it's 3 to 6 seconds. They actually say it's probably more like a half to 1 second that people can kind of make the decision whether they proceed. And then I was kind of, when I was thinking coming up to this conversation with you, is that in long form video, let's say a movie, right? For example, you're obviously going to give it more than a half a second to a second because you've decided, okay, I'm going to rent this or I'm going to watch it on TV. But what do you think is the timeline between some, like on a movie, long form video, that somebody's going to determine I'm going to watch this movie to the end or I'm going to flick it off? Understanding that some folks are like, well, I already started it. I hate it, but I'll watch it. But in general, what do you think is this is when somebody's going to fall in love with the movie? Or do you not think that that even exists in long form?
That's a debatable question, but if you listen to the streamers, they say a minute. I mean, they say 5 to 6 minutes, but really a minute. You're already deciding I'm in, so you want to make sure that that first minute's really capturing people. And so when we're talking about a screenplay, it averages a minute per page. That first
Okay.
page really has to capture your imagination. Otherwise,
Mm.
it's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, as I think I'm pretty patient when it comes to movies and books, unless it's, if something is like I can't do gory stuff or extremely scary stuff because of post-traumatic stuff I have. It triggers me and I'm like, this isn't enjoyable. So if it's something like that, like if I start watching a movie and it's evident that like this is just going to be beyond my comfort level, then I will shut it off. I usually don't give it a chance unless somebody gives me a heads up, like, hey, first couple minutes of this movie, you might want to look away. And then it's like pretty tame the rest of the movie, but there's an opening scene. Okay. So outside of that, those things I will click off of. But if I watch something and I'm like, this is really boring or the plot just isn't interesting to me, I will still give it a chance because I'm like, well, I'm here now. I'm reading or I'm watching. I'll give it a chance. And there have been times where, like, then by like 30 minutes in, or maybe even 45 minutes, like sometimes it's way in where I'm like, this was a really slow starter, but I'm totally digging it right now. So it's hard for me, but I mean, I think again, different generation. I feel like my kids probably won't be movie or book consumers in the same way I am because they are used to things kind of feeding their need a little bit more quickly. So I wonder if anybody's kind of done a study like my age watches the movie, even if they're like, well, not really interesting, but going to stick it out versus I'm not sticking around to find out what the rest of this is. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix has all your data, so they know you very well if you subscribe. And it's interesting because I subscribe to the same. I mean, I have patience like you do in terms
Right.
of the content, and I like to see character development. I like to see you know something before you get just straight into plot.
Right,
uh,
right.
but these days you have to find that right balance to be able to deliver your character development within the plot in such a way that it's still you're you're not biting your nose off despite your face. You're still giving story in there, and not just plot.
Yeah.
You want to get to know your characters. So the average attention span just of adults in general is also very low compared to how it used to be, even 5-10 years ago. And I think that's really just a factor of the world we live in.
Yeah.
Social media certainly plays a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I mean, there have been times where like I'll finish a movie and I'll say like, well, that's, 120 minutes I'll never get back, right? Like there are definitely times where I'm like, well, that didn't actually deliver. But even in those, there'll be something where I'll say like, well, that was interesting the way they had that dialogue or the way that they panned the camera, right? Like there's usually something you can find that's of interest. And I mean, I'm sure part of it is me also wanting to kind of validate the time that was just spent. So I'm like, wait a minute, what did I learn? There's got to be something. But again, like I think we could definitely learn from that stuff. But it's an art form and it's also obviously based on personal preference. I mean, you could survey 5 people and you're going to get 5 totally different opinions about any given movie or what's the best way to do something. So that certainly kind of falls into the mix. So I think I'm also sometimes intrigued by the fact that like something may have gotten rave reviews or awards and I watch it and I'm like, interesting. Like interesting that it got that when it was not of particular attraction to me, right? And I don't feel critical about the fact that like it got those awards. I'm more just like intrigued, like, okay, that's interesting to know that it was perceived in that particular way when I didn't find that. What about music selection, right? I mean, there's lots of stuff that's come out about that. You can pick the exact same scene and put different music to it, and it completely tells the emotion without any dialogue, without any change of camera, just the music. What goes into for you that music selection? Like, how do you go about like, this is the song that I'm going to pick? Where do you go to find it, etc.?
Well, yeah, it's funny you mention that. There's some great YouTube videos online where they take The Shining and make it a comedy. There's all
Exactly.
kinds of really funny YouTube videos. But yeah, music plays, I think it's 50% of your movie,
Yeah,
sound and music. And it's amazing how much it plays a part. If you think about Spielberg movies or Star Wars or anything John Williams, if you take away John Williams' score, uh, it's not the same film. It doesn't have the same impact. In terms of music selection, for me, it really just depends on the project. Every project has its own needs, it's its own beast, and
yeah,
you really have to think about, okay, well, what is the story and what's the story you're trying to tell, and how can you support that through music? And a lot of that is coming from the filmmaker, usually thinking about, well, I love, say, classical music and I want a classical score, or I really loved, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score from their last film, and can we get them, or can we get something like that?
sure.
So it really just depends on the particular filmmaker's tastes, mainly, and what's going to fit, I think, ultimately creatively for the film. It's kind of a non-answer, but
No. I mean, some of it is stuff that like we know, but I think like even though you're talking through some of like obviously there's the considerations, I think it's interesting to hear it from you as a filmmaker's perspective, right? Like I could talk about like those are the steps that somebody goes into. I mean, look with social media and depending because sometimes I use the platform like I use Canva and I use CapCut and I'll take the music from there, or sometimes I go directly into the Instagram app or the Facebook app for algorithm purposes. With that, whichever thing I'm doing, right? Like there's times where I'm like, well, I really like this song. It's like very emotionally driven and it's very John Williams-esque. And I'm like, well, that's cool. But then I'll pick something that's a little more like, okay, like this is like a jazzy hip hop thing and it's a different vibe, but that's also so it's like both of them are equally impactful, but kind of in a different way. And so I have to sometimes like, okay, what is the vibe that I want somebody to feel when I look at this? So I can relate on that level. It's like it's tough because I'm like back and forth. You mentioned John Williams, and it's funny. Not only did he impact movies, but I was like a big movie soundtrack person. My whole life, I always probably the bulk of my CD collection. I had a lot of music. I was a big music person, but my CDs and cassettes, dare I say that, and really date myself. A lot of movie soundtracks, like that would be the things that like people would be going to get albums. I was usually getting the movie soundtracks. So just really because I like the variety. And I can remember like commuting to college and like listening to John Williams, and like that commute became epic because I'm like listening to John Williams. So it's like you're not just driving down the road, you're like, and the trees are going by me and the mountain is getting closer in the distance, right? And that's in a car listening to the music without any of the scenery or anything that's involved in the movies that he was writing that music for, specifically, which were epic movies. But we take that feeling. Now, I'm sure likely the fact that I'd seen the movie and was associating some of those things were probably impacting me as well. But I just think in general, his composition, the way the music builds and the way it goes soft unexpectedly, so you almost feel like you've just been jerked backwards, that creates such an incredible effect. And so I have a lot of value for that, for composers and how they put all those different pieces together. And when you're going into choosing music for whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a commercial or whether it is a movie, you're listening to that, right? Like you're not just saying like, oh, I know this composer or I know this piece, but it's like, does it have those right pieces, those elements that are gonna capture it, and can you line it up so that like as the person comes on stage, the music elevates and it creates that type of effect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting because, most scores, a composer will take a look at the film or an early cut and start working on it. And then they will score to the actual film. And so they'll watch it and they'll find the different moments where they swell, and then they'll find the moments where it's quiet, and everything in between. And so they'll make it very much the movie. I know that that sometimes there's filmmakers like Christopher Nolan, when he's worked with Hans Zimmer, for example, he's let Hans kind of go off and just make a soundtrack to the film he hasn't even shot yet. And it's interesting that different filmmakers will take different approaches. And I know that some filmmakers really let the music help to inspire what they're going to shoot, and some will even cut to the music, and that. So it depends on how they approach their particular way of filmmaking, which is always exciting when you see each person's different unique style.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought too. And I'm kind of curious about which, now I'm like, I wonder which people have done that. Cause you think about reading through the script and writing based on dialogue alone without kind of seeing the scenery and fitting it. I think Lord of the Rings soundtrack, I feel like there was some of that involved. Some of that was written and then like the scenes were filmed. I feel like I heard that. I could be completely incorrect. So if I'm wrong, I just kind of want to forewarn everybody. I'm not speaking that as fact. I feel like I heard that, but I could be completely wrong in that regard. But that's really like the soundtrack to that, right? Like there's so many different types of music apparent within a very specific type of genre, but it fluctuates, and it definitely creates something that you wouldn't otherwise have in there. What is your favorite music to listen to? Oh, go ahead. If you were going to respond to something I just said, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when I work with a composer, sometimes I like to give them the script and then let them read it and let them come up with a theme, or let them play around with it. So they're building early on, they're involved early in the process. So it's a dialogue, it's a back and forth, between what we're working on and building and the music. And that way we can inspire each other. That's one way I like to work. And so that way it's more of a symbiosis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. A partnership. I can definitely get that. What is your favorite it might be hard. I mean, I know I have a hard time when people ask me this, but what if you had to pick a favorite genre or one of your favorite genres of music?
Oh, favorite genres of music.
You're like,
So many.
me too.
It's hard to pick. I would say, I definitely was inspired by my dad's generation. Now I'm dating myself, but he grew up in the '60s, and so I actually inherited his records and the original Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, Cream. Uh, I mean, Beatles, like you name it, like Jimi Hendrix, like all of those great albums. I have the originals, which I love to listen to. Just it's such a warm sound listening to it on a record player. I think some of those are probably my favorites if I had to pick. But with that said, I listen to pretty much everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. We had records growing up. So records were like in my early life. I don't know at what point cassette tapes kind of entered into the mix, but like records hung around for quite some time, and now of course are coming back in vogue. I think the only thing we're not going to see back are the 8 tracks. CDs, cassettes, and records are all coming back, but like you don't see nobody's just like, oh, I'm going to make an 8 track. So those don't seem to be getting back in the mix. But we had, I mean, when I was a kid, we had one of those phonograph machines that played records, played 8 tracks, a variety of different music. My mom played the piano and she would kind of play different stuff. So I'm the same way as you. Like I have different music tastes for different things. And there's some stuff that even that I don't care for, right? Like it's not my number one choice, but I don't even mind hearing it because from a like creation perspective, I'm kind of curious to hear how the person's putting this stuff together. Like they decided those two sounds were going to go well together, and even if it feels dissonant to me, I'm like, well, that they did that intentionally. I wonder what's going on here from a composition perspective. So but yeah, there was the classic stuff in the past. There was definitely has an appeal today. My kids are like really big into 80s and 90s music, and they'll like play something and be like, oh, you got to hear this cool song, and I'm like, that is not your song, that is my song. You took it from my generation. And I only tease them because they're like, don't try to use our slang, which I do, and embarrass them. So like every once in a while I'll say one of the current words or something, and they're just like, oh my gosh. So I tease them. I'm like, you're taking my music so I can take your slang. But interesting. I won't live right now, at least on this one, use any of the funny terms, but there is some stuff that I'm just like, what? I don't know where that came from, but I'm sure our parents were saying that about the stuff that we were saying, so I probably shouldn't say that. Anyway, so all right, Evan, we've been talking for a chunk here, and this has been fascinating. I knew that we would, that the evolution of the conversation could go any number of ways, but this was really cool to chat about music and composition and design and then the importance of art and all those things. So obviously you create amazing works. What would be the best way for somebody to get in touch with you and either just pick your brain or find out how to use your services? What's the best process?
Yeah, easiest way to find me is on Instagram. You can find me at Luxhammer LLC. So that's LUX, the word hammer, LLC.
Okay.
And just shoot me a DM. That's probably easiest.
Yeah, and you have a website as well. So if they aren't on social
Yep.
media, they could hit you on your website, and that's
They
also got your
go to
social media link.
luxhammer.com and you can reach out that way too.
Yeah, and follow you. I know you've got some cool projects you've talked about coming up, so we'll be able to see some of that stuff as it unfolds and in bits and pieces, because your social media kind of is a running story with little anecdotes and things. So that's cool. And then what is a final thought that you have for whoever joined us today? Something you'd kind of like to leave everybody with?
Yeah. Well, I guess in terms of final thoughts, that's a good question. I would say that I hope that each person, is just think about, if you're going through anything, if you're having any difficult times, just remember that there are better days, and to be grateful, for the things that you do have in your life. to that there are people out there that do care about you. And so just remember all of those things. And, you know, I hope everyone has a great day and that you are special.
That's beautiful. And I think that ties in well with what you started out the conversation, right? You were looking at people in your past and current life as with empathy and wanting to be there for them. And I guess it's reminding people that there are other people out there that are doing that, and to have hope moving forward. So I think that that's beautiful. I appreciate you for taking time and for answering all my questions. And I hope none of the music genres that didn't get mentioned don't feel sad that their names didn't come out of your mouth, but I'm sure they'll be okay. And thank you for everybody that was joining us today. Thank you for being patient with the technology, patient with my whatever was happening. I got kind of dazed and confused starting out the conversation today, and I appreciate everyone that's continued to really be extremely supportive and loving, both to me and to all the guests. If you would like to meet Evan and you are connected to me, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will get you that connection. And again, thank you for joining us, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.